No! He's still treating her! Move back. If I leave this room, she may die. That's not my problem.
She needs surgery now.
Then find another hero. Drunk driving. Witness already signed. I've been here since 6 this morning. You're not here for a DUI. Watch your mouth.
They're arresting the doctor?
Eyes forward. Shan, keep pressure above 70!
I'll try.
By morning, your career's finished. No. By morning, you'll wish you left me in that ER.
For 11 years, Dr. James Okafor had buried the man he used to be.
Before the white coat, he was trained to read men like Pullman down to the bone.
Sign this, and the DUI disappears. So that's what this is. You needed me out of the hospital tonight. You don't know anything!
The woman he dragged James away from wasn't just another patient.
Detective, when you find out who she is, this room will feel very small.
Detective Sergeant Vince Pullman thought he was having the easiest night of his career. He thought he was hauling in a drunk black doctor on a DUI, the kind of case that writes itself, the kind that closes itself by morning if you know the right people. He had the report already filed. He had the witness name already typed. All he needed was the man in the room. He didn't know that the man sitting in his ER, still wearing surgical gloves with someone else's blood on them, had spent 8 years as a CIA psychological assessment specialist, a man who had sat across from people who made Pullman look like a crossing guard, and had walked out with everything he needed, using nothing but patience, silence, and the ability to read a human being down to the marrow. And Pullman had just made a mistake he could not take back, because the patient, James Okafor, had been dragged away from the woman hemorrhaging on that table at 2:47 inches the morning, was Pullman's wife, Memphis, Tennessee. November. The city had a particular quality at this hour, the blues bars on Beale Street finally quiet, the river invisible in the dark, the streets belonging to the people who worked them and the people who preyed on them, and sometimes you couldn't tell the difference. Memphis General Hospital sat at the edge of Midtown, 1 block from where the property values dropped and stayed down. It served Orange Mound, Whitehaven, Binghamton communities, where a lot of people worked double shifts and still couldn't cover the bill they'd get for walking through those ER doors. Dr. James Okafor had worked here for 11 years. He could have gone somewhere quieter. He chose this one. James was 44, 6'1", broad-shouldered, with hands that moved with the economy of someone who had spent 2 decades making no wasted motion. His hair was cut close, going grey at the temples in a way that made him look, depending on the light, either distinguished or tired. His eyes were dark brown and did something unusual under pressure. They didn't change. Not cold, not hard, just still. The kind of still that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. His colleagues at Memphis General knew him as the doctor who remembered patients' names, who sat down when everyone else stood, who stayed past the end of his shift without making it obvious he was staying. What none of them knew, what no one in Memphis knew, was that before James Okafor had worn a white coat in an emergency room, he had worn something else. From 2001 to 2009. He worked for a unit inside the CIA, with no official name in any public document, medical intelligence and psychological assessment. His job: extract information from high-value subjects without leaving marks. Read people, find the crack, apply precise pressure, walk out with the truth. He left that life in 2009. He had kept a particular drawer shut for 11 years. Tonight, someone was going to make him open it. There was something else James carried that his colleagues didn't know about. When he had first started at Memphis General, a woman had called the hospital asking about the overdose records for her daughter. The call had been routed to the general administration line and never made it to him. He found out about it months later from a charge nurse who mentioned it in passing, some mother calling repeatedly, asking why no one would tell her where her daughter's prescription had come from. He had made a note of it. He had meant to follow up. He hadn't. That woman's name was Claudette Wallace. He would not know that until much later. Detective Sergeant Vince Pullman had been on the Memphis PD for 22 years. He was 51, heavyset in the way of men who had once been physically imposing and had let it go soft, but not entirely. He wore his badge where you could always see it. He had a smile that functioned like a hand extended palm up. It put you at ease right before it closed around your wrist. What his colleagues knew, Vince Pullman was street smart, well-connected. The kind of detective who closed cases other people gave up on, what no one at MPD officially knew for 2 years. Pullman had been selling internal information to a pharmaceutical distribution network operating under the name Monarch RX. Monarch ran fraudulent opioid prescriptions through Memphis hydrocodone, channeled through ghost clinics and compromised pharmacies into communities that had been chosen specifically because they had the least infrastructure to fight back. Orange Mound, Whitehaven, Binghamton. Pullman's role was simple: tell them when raids were scheduled, which witnesses were cooperative, which files were getting attention, make problems go away before they had names. He received $8,000 a month. He told himself it wasn't that serious. He had a talent for not looking directly at what he didn't want to see. His one real weakness, the only thing that could reach him somewhere the money couldn't, was his wife. Linda, 48 years old, elementary school librarian. The person who had never fully believed his performance and had never fully stopped loving him anyway. She was the reason he still went home. At 2, 3, 1 in the morning, Linda Pullman came through the ER doors of Memphis General. James had her diagnosed in 4 minutes. Ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, without surgery, in the next hour. The mortality rate was above 80%. He called the OR team. He was placing a central line to stabilize her blood pressure before transfer when the ER doors opened at 2:47 and Pullman walked in, not as a husband, as a corp. He didn't recognize his own wife. The intake desk had processed Linda Pullman under her name, and Pullman had not yet been called. James had been focused on stabilization before notification. Pullman was here for something else entirely. Dr. Okafor, the voice of a man who had already decided how this went. Need you to step outside. James didn't look up. He was threading the line. 1 minute. Not 1 minute. Now. A beat nurse looked up from the opposite side of the table. She was 26 years old and had been at Memphis General for 8 months. She looked at Pullman, looked at the monitor, showing Linda's blood pressure at 78/48, and said, "He's the only one who knows her full condition right now." Pullman looked at her the way men with badges sometimes look at people who speak when they haven't been addressed. "Then get another doctor." The nurse looked at James. James finished placing the line. He set the instrument down, stripped one glove, turned to face Pullman. The detective had his badge visible. 2 uniformed officers in the doorway. He held a traffic incident report, James's name typed at the top. A witness name below it, Marcus Webb, P.O. Box address in Germantown. James looked at Pullman's face. He processed it the way he'd been trained, micro-tension around the jaw, eyes moving to the door twice in 10 seconds. The particular rigidity of someone performing a task that has a timer on it. Pullman wasn't here because of a DUI report. He was here because something was scheduled to happen in this building tonight, and James needed to not be in it. Nurse Chen, James said, not breaking eye contact with Pullman. Continue the protocol. Get doctor. Ray's down here immediately. Or 2 as soon as she's stable enough to move. I'm signing the orders now. He signed. His left hand was still gloved. Blood on the latex. He didn't take the glove off. He signed with the other hand. Pullman looked at the gloved hand, said nothing. Let's go, James said. Pullman cuffed him in the hallway, in front of 9 staff members and a waiting room that had 4 people in it at that hour. Nobody moved to intervene. Nobody said anything loud enough to matter. James walked calmly through it, noting everything, the name badge on the officer to his left, the camera position above the exit, the expression on the face of a young resident who watched from a doorway and then looked away. He noted the looking away most of all. in the back of the cruiser, hands behind him. James closed his eyes. A black physician in handcuffs in the back of a Memphis police car at 3 inches the morning. Taken from a patient he was actively treating on the basis of a report that had been fabricated. The system didn't need to be malicious to make this work. It just needed to be willing to believe a certain version of events more quickly than another. He filed that thought where it belonged and began to work. Precinct 2, 3:15 inches the morning. Small room. Metal table. Fluorescent bulb with a flicker that hit every 4 seconds like a small interruption you couldn't quite ignore. Pullman came in alone. Dropped the incident report on the table. Pulled a chair around and sat on the wrong side of it. Arms folded over the back. The posture of a man conducting an informal conversation between colleagues, which was its own kind of threat. Here's what I need you to understand, he said. This investigation takes 3 to 6 months minimum. During that time, your license is flagged, pending review. You're not treating patients. You're not consulting. You're not in that building. You let that settle. The Tennessee Medical Board has 2 people on it who owe me. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You want me to withdraw my complaints about Monarch RX. A pause. Short. But real. I don't know what you're referring to. 6 complaints. 18 months. Different supervisors each time. All of them went nowhere. James kept his voice completely even. You were here tonight at 2:47 with an 8-hour-old report. That's not procedure. You needed me out of that building for a specific window. He watched Pullman's jaw. What was scheduled to happen at Memphis General tonight? Pullman stood up. The easy posture was gone. You'll stay here until morning. He walked out at 6 in the morning. A public defender arrived who didn't make eye contact and left a folder on the table and said the words James expected him to say. James studied the man while he talked. Not hired by the public defender's office, referred by someone else. The briefcase was too new. The suit too good. The affect too carefully calibrated to project neutrality. Who's paying you? James asked. The man picked up the folder and left at 8. His phone was returned with his wallet. He had a text from Patricia Reyes, his closest colleague at Memphis General. James. Linda Pullman made it through surgery. Stable in ICU. Also at 4 a.m. a group came in calling themselves Meridian Healthcare Compliance Services. Full paperwork. They reviewed the ER pharmacy records and pulled copies of 4 specific patient files, all overdose fatalities, all hydrocodone. I looked up the company this morning. James. They don't exist. James read it twice. Sat down on the front steps of Precinct, 2 inches the November morning. He had filed 6 complaints about Monarch RX opioid patterns in his ER. 6 times a report had gone in, and nothing had come back. He had thought it was institutional indifference, the kind that operated as policy without anyone having to say it out loud. Now, he understood. It wasn't indifference. It was a door that had been deliberately, specifically kept closed, and last night, while he sat in an interrogation room, a ghost company had walked into his hospital and removed the evidence that could connect those deaths to their source. He thought about the mother who had called the hospital asking about her daughter's prescription records, the call that had never reached him. He thought about how long she had been sitting with that question, and how long the answer had been buried. He stood up and called a cab. He knew what the 2 choices were. He knew what the second one was going to cost. He chose it anyway. The safe in his bedroom closet was aircraft-grade steel. Combination, rotating on a system. Only he knew. He hadn't opened it in 3 years. Before that, he hadn't opened it in 4. He turned the dials from a part of his memory that didn't connect to the rest of his life in Memphis. A different room. A different person. A different set of hands inside a prepaid phone. A USB drive. A black notebook with personal notation shorthand. A card with 1 phone number and no name. He looked at the card for 30 seconds. The last time he had used that number, A man had died as a downstream consequence of information James had provided. He had not been able to prove the connection. He had also not been able to disprove it. He had closed the drawer and not opened it since. He put in a new SIM. Sent one text, times Cataract Falls. Memphis. Background on MPD. Detective Sergeant Vince Pullman. Priority. Set the phone down. Opened his laptop. He built the assessment the way he had been taught. 3 columns. Nothing crossing from inference to fact until it was confirmed. He was 40 minutes in when his phone buzzed times. Received. 48 hours. He went to an electronics store on Union Avenue and paid cash for 2 small wireless cameras, a body recorder, and an automatic backup device. He drove back and spent 2 hours reconstructing from memory every Monarch RX report he had filed, who received it, who signed off. What happened next? 3 names emerged with consistency. Pullman, Captain Roy Dillard, Pullman's supervisor, who had signed the routing forms that sent every complaint into a process it never came out of, and Dr. Howard Fitch, a family physician at a clinic in East Memphis with a hydrocodone prescription rate 7 times the state average. That evening, he sent an anonymous email to Dillard's personal address. Roy, I know about Meridian. I know about November 14th. And I know about Dr. Fitch. You have 48 hours. No name. No specific demand. He just needed the machine to start turning so he could watch which parts moved. The machine moved faster than he expected, and in a direction he hadn't fully prepared for. The next morning, at 9 o'clock, his personal phone rang. A voice he didn't recognize, not Pullman, not the fake public defender. Older. Deliberate. Accustomed to being listened to, the man introduced himself as Kevin Marsh, attorney. Representing clients at MPD, they traced the email in 14 hours. James had used a VPN and a disposable account, routed through 2 servers. 14 hours. Which meant someone inside MPD's IT division was not just competent, they were looking for exactly this. Which meant they had been told to look. He had not accounted for that. The email was supposed to be untraceable for at least 72 hours. The fact that it wasn't meant his timeline had just compressed and someone now knew he was moving. Withdraw your complaints, Marsh said. Sign a non-disclosure. The DUI investigation disappears. All of it is over by tomorrow morning. James said he needed 24 hours. 12. Marsh said. After that, we proceed differently. He hung up, sent an urgent text to the prepaid times. They traced my email in 14 hours. MPD has someone in IT actively monitoring. Need Pullman financial background and connection to Meridian faster than 48. The reply came in 11 minutes. Times Pullman $96. 000 over 24 months via 3 Shell LLCs. Meridian Healthcare Compliance Services equals Shell. Delaware registration. Owned by Monarch RX Holdings, LLC. Working on Dillard. James looked at that number. 96,000. This wasn't a side arrangement between a corrupt cop and a mid-level dealer. This was infrastructure. This had been built. He also looked at what he'd just been told and understood. His anonymous email had not destabilized them. It had alerted them. He had moved too early with too thin a tool. And now, they were actively searching for him. That was the mistake. Small, but real. He had pushed the button before he had enough behind it to survive the response. He needed something he didn't have yet, and he needed it before the 12 hours ran out. He was sitting in his car outside, Memphis General, suspended, unable to enter when someone knocked on his window at 6 that evening. A small woman, around 60, white hair, a worker's jacket. She had the look of someone who had been through something that reorganized everything. The way grief sometimes does not broken, but rearranged. He lowered the glass. Your doctor. Okafor. Yes. My name is Dolores Washington. My son Marcus, you treated him in August. He didn't make it. She didn't look away. Before he died, you were the only person who asked him where he got the medication. Nobody else asked. Not the other doctors. Not the police. Just you. James remembered Marcus Washington, 31 years old. Hydrocodone overdose. Cardiac arrest, 3 times in the ER. He had documented the prescription origin carefully. That report was one of the 6 that had been buried. I remember him, James said, and he meant it. His files were in what they took last night. Dolores said, I have a friend who works inside. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small envelope. There's a woman named Claudette Wallace. She lost her daughter in June. Same thing. She's been collecting evidence for 6 months' receipts. Names. Delivery records. She doesn't know what to do with it. Nobody will listen to her. She held out the envelope. Her address. James took it. Looked at Dolores Washington in the fading light. I'll contact her, he said, after she walked away. He sat for a moment. Claudette Wallace, the woman who had called the hospital asking about her daughter's prescription. The call that had never reached him, he had meant to follow up. He hadn't. She had spent 6 months doing alone what he had failed to do in a year and a half. He started the car. Claudette Wallace's home in Whitehaven was small and clean, with a kitchen table that had become an archive. She was 58, former bookkeeper at a logistics company, and she had applied 3 decades of making numbers tell the truth to a problem that no one had been willing to put numbers to. Aisha Wallace, 26 years old, dead in June. Hydrocodone from a Monarch RX distribution chain. Claudette had the names of 8 prescribing physicians, 23 pharmacy locations, and the piece James didn't have invoices from a company called Southern Star Distribution that supplied all 23 locations. Who owns Southern Star? James asked. She slid a document across. Roy Dillard. His wife holds the shares. James looked at the paper. The structure crystallized, Dillard running the enterprise. Pullman as the protective layer, Fitch as the prescription mechanism, and Southern Star as the physical supply chain hidden behind a spouse's name. And then he understood something else. The records that Meridian had taken from Memphis General, they were Claudette's evidence too, whatever she couldn't get directly. The hospital records would have confirmed someone had known she was building a case, or suspected it. Have you talked to anyone official? He asked. FBI turned me away twice. Her voice was flat in the way of someone who has stopped expecting to be surprised by that particular answer. MPD, I didn't bother. Not FBI Memphis, James said. She looked at him. You sound very sure. I have a reason to be. She was quiet for a moment. I called the hospital once, she said. About 8 months ago, trying to get Aisha's prescription records. They put me on hold, and then the call dropped, and nobody called back. She folded her hands on the table. I figured that was how it was going to go. James held that, did not say what he was thinking. Can I have copies of everything? He said. That night, he built the switch. He compiled everything, Claudette's documentation, the victim list, his own suppressed reports, the financial background on Pullman, the Southern Star records, and 2 screenshots of Doc Fitch's prescribing data pulled legally before his suspension from a system he had authorized access to. 5 cloud services, 5 disposable email accounts, automatic send, scheduled for 72 hours out DEA, Memphis, DOJ, Public Integrity in Washington, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the Memphis Commercial Appeal Investigative Desk, and a freelance journalist named Teresa Nguyen, who had written the only serious piece on Memphis opioid deaths he had ever read. He texted Marsh Times, "Your 12 hours passed. I'm not signing anything. Tell your client's dead man switch. Set. De. Uhr timer. Der. Doi. TB. And press. If anything happens to me, Claudette Wallace, or anyone connected to this, it sends automatically. There is no technical way to stop it once it's running. He sent it. Sat in the quiet of his apartment. The phone rang 19 minutes later. Not Marsh, a different voice. Older than Pullman. Slower. With the particular deliberateness of a man who had spent decades learning that patience was the same thing as power. Doctor. Okafor. Not a question. My name is Roy Dillard. James said nothing. I wanted to speak to you directly. Dillard said, as a courtesy, because I think you're an intelligent man. And intelligent men deserve to understand their situation clearly before they make irreversible decisions. I'm listening. Men like you tend to believe that truth is a weapon, a poser. It isn't. Truth is paperwork. And I have spent 22 years building relationships with the people who decide what paperwork means and what happens to it. Another pause. Slower. Your dead man's switch sends files to agencies whose Memphis contacts I have known personally for a decade. You understand what I'm telling you. James let the silence run for 4 full seconds before he spoke. I understand that you're calling me at 11 o'clock at night, he said, which tells me the switch scared you more than you expected. A longer silence from the other end. You have a good life in Memphis. Doctor, Dillard said, you do good work. I'm giving you the opportunity to keep both of those things. You gave that opportunity to 22 people, too. James said, they're all dead. He ended the call. He sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up the prepaid phone and sent one message times Dillard just called me directly. He has relationships inside FBI Memphis. Switch needs to go above field office level. Can you route to DOJ Washington, direct contact? Not field, reply, in 7 minutes times. Yes. Replacing Memphis DEA, contact with DOJ DC, direct line, now. Also, Dillard made 3 calls after yours. 1 to Monarch Enforcement. 1 to someone at the Commercial Appeal. 1 to a number registered to a Howard Kim. Civilian contractor at FBI Memphis Field Office. Kim manages their active investigation scheduling list. James updated the documentation. Added Kim. Reconfigured 2 of the 5 automatic send targets to Washington-level contacts. Only, he had built this switch, assuming the local field offices were clean. They weren't. That was the second thing he had been wrong about. He did not sleep that night, at 6:30 the next morning. The prepaid buzz times need to meet. I hope unpopular. Sudubu AM. The man who sat down across from him was around 40. Plain clothes. With the posture of someone trained to look like he wasn't watching everything. James read him in the time it took him to sit. Detective Marcus Webb. He said it before James could ask. Pullman used my name on the fake report without asking. I know. I've been at Precinct 2 for 8 years. He looked out the window. The last person who filed a report from inside Precinct 2. They found in a 1-car accident on I-246 weeks later. Officially, an accident. James drank his coffee and waited. Webb placed a USB drive on the table. 6 months of recorded calls. Dillard and Howard Kim. Dillard and Monarch's financial coordinator. I was waiting for the right moment. He pushed it across. Last night, Dillard called Monarch's enforcement contact. I heard it. They're not trying to break your switch. They're going after Claudette Wallace. James was already standing up before Webb finished the sentence. He called Claudette from the car. She picked up on the second ring. Mrs. Wallace. Are you at home? Yes. Why? Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone you don't know. I'm coming. He paused. Do you have somewhere you can go for the next 24 hours? Someone you trust completely? A silence. Then, steadily, my sister in Germantown. Go there now. Take your documentation. Everything. Originals if you have them. Copies if you don't. Don't use your regular route. He heard her moving. Is Aisha's case? It's still intact. James said, I promise you that Go. He routed to Claudette's house, confirmed she was leaving, and then did something he had not planned to do yet. He sent the full documentation package, not the automatic switch, but a direct manual submission to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation tip line with a cover letter laying out the complete structure. Dillard, Pullman, Fitch, Kim, Monarch RX, Southern Star, and 22 confirmed fatalities with names and dates. He sent it and then sat in his car on a Whitehaven side street and waited. At 11 that morning, his personal phone rang. Pullman. The voice was not the same voice from the interrogation room. The authority had drained out of it and left something underneath, that James recognized a man who had been presented with a fact he couldn't process back into a manageable shape. They told me who was in the ER that night. Pullman said, the nurse told Linda this morning. When she woke up, his voice had a quality James had heard before in rooms very different from Memphis, in people who had just seen something about themselves they couldn't unsee. She woke up and the first thing she asked was who the attending physician was, and the nurse told her, and Linda told me. James waited. She said, Pullman, stop. Tried again. She looked at me and she said, Vince, you arrested the man who saved my life. A long breath. Not angry. She just said it like a fact, like she was reading something out loud. James still said nothing. I went out into the hallway. Pullman said, I had my phone in my hand. I was going to call Roy and tell him I don't know what I was going to tell him. That I needed more time. That something was wrong. Another pause. I stood there for 10 minutes, and I couldn't dial the number. Where are you now? James asked. Parking garage. 3rd floor. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. Go to the Tennessee Attorney General's office. James said, not MPD. Not FBI Memphis. State AG. Tell them everything, Dillard. Monarch. Southern Star. Howard Kim. All of it. Tell them you want a cooperation agreement. Do it today. Before Dillard realizes you're not answering his calls. And then what? Then you go back to the hospital. James said, and you sit with your wife. A silence so long James almost spoke again. The AG's number, Pullman said finally. James gave it to him from memory. At 9:17 the next morning, 3 TBI vehicles pulled up to Precinct 2. 2 more arrived at Roy Dillard's home in Germantown. Simultaneously, DEA agents executed warrants at 3 Monarch RX distribution locations in the Memphis metro area, but Dillard had moved first. At 8:51 that morning, 26 minutes before the TBI arrived, his attorney had submitted an emergency injunction to Shelby County Circuit Court, attaching a video file. The video appeared to show James Okafor accepting a cash payment from an unidentified man outside a pharmacy on Summer Avenue. It had a timestamp from 3 months prior. It had James's face clearly visible. B9:30. The video was on the local news. B9:45. James's phone had 47 missed calls. He watched the video on his laptop. Watched it 3 times. The face was his. The coat was his. The grey one he wore to run errands. The pharmacy was one he had been to. He was certain of it. At around that time, he pressed pause on the frame where the exchange happened. The hand accepting the envelope was his left hand. James Okafor was right-handed. He had never once in his life used his left hand to accept anything. It was the hand he gestured with. The hand that rested at his side. If you had watched him for a week, you would know this, but a video editor wouldn't know that. Dillard wouldn't know that. He sent the clip to the prepaid contact with 1 line, times deepfake. Left hand. Need forensic analysis and original metadata. How fast? Reply times. Analyzing now. Estimated 90 minutes. 90 minutes. The news cycle was already running. Memphis General's Administrative Board had convened an emergency session. Patricia Reyes texted Times James what is happening. There are cameras outside the hospital. He called her back. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to know that it might affect your position at the hospital. A pause. Tell me. Think back. Is there anyone on staff who has been unusually interested in my schedule, my patient load? Anyone who has asked about my movements in the last few months? She was quiet for a moment. There's a billing coordinator. Joined about 5 months ago. He asked me once what days you typically finished late. Another pause. I thought it was just making conversation. His name, she gave it to him. He passed it to the prepaid. 73 minutes later, Time's video is composite. Original footage is from a pharmacy security camera. Okafor is genuine. Exchange is inserted. Metadata shows file created 11 days ago. Billing coordinator at Memphis General contract employee. Placed through a staffing agency owned by a subsidiary of Monarch RX Holdings. James printed the forensic report. He forwarded it to the TBI lead contact, Patricia Reyes. The commercial appeal, and Teresa Nguyen. Then he called the local news desk directly and said he had forensic documentation that the video submitted by Roy Dillard's attorney was a fabricated composite, and that he would provide it to any journalist who wanted it within the hour. By noon, the original story was running alongside a second one. At 2:00 the afternoon, Roy Dillard was arrested in the lobby of his attorney's office in East Memphis. He did not go quietly. He stood in the lobby for 40 seconds, saying that this was a political attack, that the evidence had been manipulated, that he had served this city for 22 years. A TBI agent put his hand on Dillard's arm. Dillard shook it off. The agent put it back. The lobby had 12 people in it, and 4 of them had phones out. James was not there. He was in his car, outside Memphis General. When Patricia Reyes texted him a photograph, the administrative board had voted unanimously 20 minutes ago to restore his clinical privileges pending a formal review that, based on the forensic documentation, was expected to close in his favor within 72 hours. He looked at the photograph, read it twice, then he looked out the window at the hospital, the place he had chosen 11 years ago. For reasons he had sometimes had to remind himself of when the reasons got harder to hold. He gave himself 1 minute to sit with it. Then he started the car. The formal proceedings ran across 3 weeks. Roy Dillard faced 18 federal charges: RICO, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, obstruction of justice, fabrication of evidence, and 6 counts of witness tampering. Southern Star Distribution was dissolved, its assets seized. Dr. Howard Fitch surrendered his medical license and faced criminal prosecution on 43 counts. Howard Kim was terminated from his contractor position and indicted on 4 federal charges. Monarch RX Holdings was shut down by DEA across operations in 6 states. Pullman testified at every session he was required to attend. He sat at the witness table in a gray suit, without his badge, and answered every question he was asked. James saw him once, in the hallway outside a courtroom, and they looked at each other without speaking. Pullman's face had the quality of a man who has arrived somewhere he deserved to be and knows it. Linda Pullman attended none of the proceedings. James heard this through Patricia, who had heard it from someone in the hospital administration. He didn't know what it meant for the 2 of them. He didn't think it was his to know. The names were read at the first evidentiary hearing. 22 names, in alphabetical order, each one with a date and a confirmed connection to the Monarch RX chain. The youngest was 19. The oldest was 63. The reading took 4.5 minutes. Claudette Wallace sat in the 3rd row and did not look away from the front of the room for the entire duration. When Aisha Wallace's name was read, Claudette closed her eyes. She opened them before the next name. 3 days after his privileges were fully restored, James received an email at an address he had believed was permanently deactivated. The message was 4 lines. It referenced the Cataract Falls contact. It said that his use of agency resources had been flagged. It said that his identity had been questioned during a routine security review. It ended Times, "We need to speak." He sat with the email for a long time. He had known, when he opened the safe, that the drawer didn't close the same way twice. That was the rule, not written anywhere, but known. The tools you use leave residue. The contacts you activate become contacts that have activated you. The thread is always attached in both directions. He had made the calculation. He had decided the cost was acceptable. He was still sitting with whether that had been the right call. He typed one word, times no. He closed the laptop. He knew that wasn't the end of it. The thread was still there. He could feel it now in a way he couldn't before. Not a weight exactly. More like a presence. The way an old injury makes itself known when the weather changes. He changed into his coat and drove to Whitehaven. Claudette Wallace opened the door before he knocked. He had a feeling she had been expecting him. Or someone. Or something that resembled the end of one part of a long story. He placed a document on her kitchen table. 22 names. Dates. Confirmed cause and confirmed source for each one. Aisha Wallace's name was 6 lines from the top. These are in the official court record. He said. They were read aloud in the proceeding. All 22. Claudette stood at the table and looked at the paper. Her finger moved to her daughter's name and rested there. Gently. The way you touch something that is precious and irreplaceable, and also gone. James stood on the other side of the table and waited. I called the hospital. She said. A long time ago. About Aisha's prescription records. I know. James said. The call never reached me. She looked up at him. I should have followed up. He said. I'm sorry I didn't. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Once not absolution. Exactly. But the acknowledgement of a person who has learned, through long practice, to distinguish between what can be changed and what can only be named. Would you like some coffee? She said. Yes. James said. Thank you. The following Tuesday, James walked back through the front entrance of Memphis General for the first time in 9 days. No ceremony. Nurse Chen looked up from the nursing station and nodded. Patricia Reyes was at the far end of the hallway and raised one hand without turning around. The ER smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, and the particular combination of exhaustion and alertness that accumulated in a place where something was always at stake. He changed into his white coat, washed his hands, pushed through the door. First patient, a 7-year-old with a broken wrist. His mother sat beside him. Red-eyed from a night of worried sleeplessness, James pulled a chair over, sat to the boy's eye level. Hi, he said. Does it hurt a lot right now? The boy nodded, trying very hard not to let his chin wobble. That's okay, James said. We're going to take care of it. He meant it the way he always meant it. That was the thing that had not changed. The drawer was open now. The thread was reattached. The silence of the past 11 years had a different quality than it had before, but this part, the part where a child was in pain and he was the person in the room who could help, this part was the same as it had always been. That was enough to keep going. Power doesn't collapse because someone attacks it. It collapses because someone refuses to let the paperwork be the final word. Roy Dillard was right about one thing. Truth is paperwork. What he didn't account for was a 58-year-old bookkeeper in Whitehaven who was better at paperwork than anyone in his network, and who had started filing it 6 weeks before James Okafor ever opened his safe. James made mistakes. He moved too early with the anonymous email and gave them 14 hours to identify him when he had counted on 72. He underestimated how far the reach went inside federal offices. He did not follow up on a phone call that a grieving mother made 8 months before any of this began. None of those mistakes were the ones that determined the outcome. The outcome was determined by 22 people whose names deserved to be in a courtroom, and by the people who refused to let those names stay buried. Sometimes justice doesn't begin with the most powerful person in the room. Sometimes it begins in a kitchen. In Whitehaven, with a woman who decided that grief without action was something she wasn't willing to accept. If you're being honest with yourself, in the moment when James was still wearing a bloody glove, being walked out of that ER in handcuffs. Knowing the patient on that table was connected to the man who put them on, what would you have done? Not what you want to say. What you would actually have done. Take a second with that. Then leave your answer in the comments. If this story kept you in your seat, hit subscribe. There's another one coming that I think you're going to want to hear. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that the system can be beaten not by the loudest person in the room, but by the most patient one, send this to them.